I'm with Helen Mary Jones of Plaid Cymru, who is the candidate for Llanelli and the Mid and West Wales region as well for the MS at the Senedd in 2021, the May elections. Helen Mary, let's just start. There are obviously people who you want to vote for you in Llanelli, and for a lot of those people, it's been a very, very tough year. Massive issues, health issues, education issues, homelessness, drugs, poverty. The question really is, I guess they would ask, and we would ask you in reality, how can you represent them? Do you have any kind of idea of the suffering, the problems, the issues? And if you do, how do you get that information? Are you going, you can't go door to door. How is it that you're gathering that knowledge to know what it is they want you to do as their elected representative?
Well, I certainly think I've got a feel of it, Alan. I wouldn't say that I can understand it in the same way as you can when you can go door to door. I mean, I never, ever go out canvassing, go out knocking doors without learning something, without finding something that I didn't know. And for me in politics, that's really important. And this time is quite frustrating from that point of view. But we're doing things to try and address that. We've been telephoning. We've telephoned hundreds and hundreds of people across the Llanelli constituency already. And those messages coming back very much the same. People concerned about their health, people who have suffered with COVID, but also people who have had other treatments delayed because of it. A lot of people really worried about what's going to happen, particularly to our young people, as the support for business ends, as the economy opens up. Where are those jobs going to be? How are we going to make sure that our young people have got a future? And it's a lot of the older generation asking me that as well. Young people asking some really powerful questions about mental health and support for mental health. And about the environment, about what's Wales going to do to play our part in bringing global warming to an end, in stopping climate change. So we're getting some of that through the phone. Of course, I've never in my life had as many emails as I have now on a day-to-day basis. That's beginning to slow down as the Senedd, of course, has come to an end now and we're in campaigning mode. But we're now getting the emails asking me, well, what will Plaid do about this? What will Plaid do about that? Social media platforms as well. The trouble with social media is that it's a bit self-selecting. We can use Facebook advertising, for example, to reach out to people who don't follow me on Facebook, but whether or not they respond to that is not the same as responding to a knock on the door. So I think I do have a sense of how difficult it is, and of course what's happened in the time of COVID is it's highlighted all sorts of problems that we knew were there anyway and made them worse. So we knew that women and young people had a rough time in the jobs market, much more likely to be working in low-paid jobs, in unstable jobs, 0 hours contracts. And we know that they've been worse hit. We know that our National Health Service had its capacity reduced, so that when the COVID crisis first hit, we didn't have those spare beds in the system that 15 years before we would have had and would have helped us cope. So I think I've got a bit of a feel for it, but I've got to be truthful. I am absolutely desperate to get out there in a safe, social distanced way, to be able to listen to people directly and to be able to put forward some of the positive ideas that Plaid has got to deal with some of those issues.
There was a low turnout last time. Obviously, this time, it might be, the weather might be good. Lots of things affect the turnout. But also, you have the 16 and 17-year-olds. Are you putting sort of equal effort into the young? I mean, this is a massive element, the potential votes for you. So how are you balancing it? Are you really going 50-50 for the generations, or are you going all out for the young? Because they're more likely to turn out, aren't they?
Well, we certainly hope that they will. I'll be writing personally to every young person who's 16 or 17 who's voting for the first time in this election, both to put across some of the ideas that Plaid has got about the issues that concern them, but also to invite them to get in touch with me to see if there's anything else that they want to know. So they all get a letter. Schools have been finding different ways to engage, so they've asked candidates to send videos. I've had a virtual session with some young students from Ysgol Ystrade, which is then going to be broadcast to everybody else in their year groups. We will be having a virtual hustings for Coleg Sir Gar. So it's really important to reach out to those first-time voters, but we want to have strong messages for everyone. And of course, what resonates for one age group will often resonate for another. As I just said, when we're phoning, the people we're speaking to when we phone landlines tend to be older people, but an awful lot of those are raising concerns about young people's future. So I can talk to them about Plaid's job and training guarantee for every 16 to 24-year-old. Very important policy for me personally, because of course I was young in the 1980s and I was lucky. I mean, I was only out of work for 6 months, but many of my friends were out of work for 2 or 3 years, and for some of them, they've never caught up economically in the whole of their working life, and we can't allow that to happen to this generation. So some of the messages will run with everybody. But what I've been saying in the talking directly to young people is, please use your vote. Make sure you're registered and use your vote. And I can honestly say, and I've said to them, I would rather that you used your vote and didn't vote for me than that you didn't use your vote, because the decisions, I mean, the argument for giving the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, and not everybody agreed, though I'm very strongly in favour of it, is that the people of my generation sitting in the Senedd are making decisions that will affect those young people's lives long after they're not affecting us anymore, and they need to have that voice there. And so they set the agenda in many ways. Our youth parliament has helped to set the agenda in the Senedd around single-use plastics, around mental health issues. It's one of the reasons why one of Plaid's commitments is to mental health and wellbeing hubs for young people in communities, so that you can just refer yourself if you're in distress. You don't have to wait for 6 months for mental health services, as too many young people do now. We've responded to some of those messages. The young people engaged in climate change protests. Plaid put forward the first motion in the Senedd, and Wales became the first nation to declare a climate emergency, and that was responding to what young people were telling us. So we really need them to take that passion for issues and actually turn that into a vote, because that's where we make the difference in a democracy.
You've been in a spotted bother for your tweets. Do you think that you would have that will have a major effect on your votes in Llanelli, or are you sort of banking on the fact that it's not as big an LGBTQ plus community, says, a seat like Cardiff, to have any significant impact? Do you think people will take that? People have raised those issues with me, and I can reassure them. I mean, a lot of things that people say I've said have been completely inaccurate, just simply not true. I'm really proud of the work that Plaid has done to support the trans community. When we had an opportunity, for example, to do a budget deal with Labour, one of the things that we prioritised was a gender recognition service for trans people. When that was being introduced, when I was health spokesperson, trans people came to me with some concerns about whether the right people were being appointed into that service. I raised those directly with the health board and was able to get that community some reassurances. I have in my campaigning team in Llanelli young people who are non-binary, gay and trans, and they don't have any issues with my candidacy whatsoever. We've seen millions of pounds now handed out to businesses across Wales, particularly in Llanelli. Llanelli House itself stands to benefit from £240,000 between the council, the county council, and the town council. Is it value for money? Does that bring in the kind of income, tourism and change that Llanelli needs? When you look at the town, almost 1 in 3 shops now are derelict.
We are going to need to take, let's start with the town centre. We're going to need to take a fresh look at how we support and transform our town centre. And of course, it isn't just us. Town and city centres are changing across the whole of Wales. I mean, in the big cities like Swansea and Cardiff, we're not going to have the tens of thousands of commuters coming into the city every day to work. What our towns and city centres are going to need to look like will need to change. I think we need to do more to make it possible for people to actually live in the town centre, because of course, if people are living there, then they'll use the retail. I think we can think creatively about, can we bring public services more into the town centre? Because if you've got people based working there, what I'd like to do, and of course, when I was Llanelli's Assembly member before, when we had Trostre built for the first time, the big shopping centre, and we were hemorrhaging businesses. I went out and did a bit of a tour of towns in England that had faced similar issues and came back with some of the ideas that they were using. And one of those ideas finally put into place was for the local authority to buy some of the big units, break them down into smaller units, and then have people living above them in flats. And we've done a little bit of that internationally, like to see more. But one of the things that I would do if I'm elected is to do that again, to go and look at other towns and cities, and not just in the UK, but of course with these virtual methods, you can go and have conversations with people all over the world and see what other towns and city centres are doing to revitalise themselves. I think it's a pity that the pandemic has made the situation worse, because the business development district was doing some good work to bring people into the town, and of course a lot of that momentum has been slowed down by COVID. Hopefully we get that going again. I think the investment that has been made in keeping our businesses going has been really important. I've been able to talk to and to influence some of the things that the Welsh Government has done. For example, the fund for freelancers in the arts businesses, that came directly out of something that came from the Culture Committee when I was its chair. But we will need to do more, and we need a new approach to how we develop our economy. And in Plaid, we're talking about economic policy. It's not just about creating wealth, though of course it's got to do that, but it's got to share that wealth. And that's between individuals who have suffered with unfairness in the economy. We're talking about women, we're talking about younger workers, but it's also about different parts of Wales. We need to share that wealth. We can't just keep creating jobs in the southeast and the northeast, and that's why Plaid would take a kind of an area by area approach to how we rebuild our economy. I think we need to work with local businesses. I think doing it top down isn't the way. And we know in our communities, don't we, Alan, that there's so many small businesses. If they could enable somebody who employs 2 people to take on a third, somebody who employs 1 person to take on another one, that's the way over time. But in the short term, we'll need to invest in the public sector, in big building projects, things like refitting our homes to make them energy efficient, building new homes, to make sure that people aren't left unemployed when the COVID crisis is over.
There will be people, though, that will be raising an eyebrow at some of the developments. Llanelli, as I said, is decaying. We've spoken to an RIBA architect who said that, we shouldn't be building there. We should be putting the old stuff right. The hotel at Machynnes, a long way from the railway station, a bus service, and existing hotels in Llanelli that can't barely fill the rooms they have. Are you concerned that these vanity projects might just leave the taxpayer out of pocket, staring at another Eastgate, another Darwin hub, another white elephant?
I don't think it's fair to describe them necessarily as vanity projects, and it depends on on what's in the public sector control and what isn't. If we take, for example, the city deal, the local authorities have had to respond to what the UK government has put on the table. If you're if you're a local government leader and you've got somebody offering you tens of millions of pounds to invest in your community, hundreds of millions of pounds across Wales.
But they don't say to them that they've got to build a hotel, though, do they? They don't say to them, you have to build a hotel, you have to, that comes from somewhere. Yeah, sorry, I do understand what you're saying, that central government does say, look, this is what we want you to do. This is how much money we're willing to give you for this particular area. That's the remit. But given that, then, there must, what you said about this top down, we're almost told in Llanelli, this is what you're going to have. There is no consultation with the mass community at large that says, what is it that you think Llanelli will benefit from most? Is it a wellbeing centre? Is it the old town centre, putting it back? Is it, as you say, micro businesses, bringing in people, a little creative hub like the Silicon Valley type thing? All of those things. But we don't. We just seem to see it in the star. This is happening tomorrow in Llanelli. And there's no consultation.
I don't think that's an entirely fair characterisation, and I put a bit of I think there's always more you can do and better you can do in terms of consulting with communities and involving people. But certainly around the developments for Pentrawell, there's been an enormous amount of consultation with that community about what we want to see there, about how we can make sure that the jobs that are created there are really accessible for local people. That's why there's the big emphasis on training. I will come back to my point, though, that local authorities, when they've got to go to the Westminster government for funding, have up to a point got to deliver what the Westminster government tells them to deliver, or they don't get the resources. And so then they have to consider, well, what's going to create the jobs quickly? What's going to drive up the gross domestic product locally quickly? Now, you and I know that measuring gross domestic product is not a good way of measuring how prosperous a community or individuals within that community are. It's much too broad brush. But if they're going to get, if local authorities are going to get the money, they have to be governed by the targets that the UK government is setting. Now, that could take us into another whole conversation about whether or not that is right, and whether, and obviously from my point of view, that money should come to Wales, and then our elected government, working with our local authorities and our communities, should decide how it's going to be spent. But if I'm a local authority leader and somebody's offering me that money, you as a good journalist would be the first person saying to me, well, why won't you take it then?
Adam Price has said today that he will take personal charge of the financial economy of Wales if he becomes First Minister. There may be people again who, question that, and given that he's had some troubles in the past with his business Idioba, huge sums of public money invested with promises of jobs. It didn't last quite a year. A lot of debts, creditors unpaid, lots of questions unanswered. Is Adam fit to be the leader in charge of billions of pounds of the Welsh Government?
Adam is absolutely fit to do that. We could argue that we need more people who are entrepreneurial, who will take some risks, and that sometimes businesses won't succeed. When with our new Prosperity Wales, our new economic development agency for Wales, we will expect that economic development agency to take risks. And if you take some risks, sometimes you won't deliver what you wanted to deliver. But one thing that's clear is if we keep on doing the same thing, we'll keep on getting the same results. And we've had a Welsh government that's been promising us economic transformation for 21 years, and that's a lifetime. And they haven't delivered it. Now, Adam is a very skilled economist. He's also very passionate about spreading wealth. He grew up in a miner's son. He knows what it's like not to have what you need. And he's passionate about making sure that all young people have those opportunities that so many of them are denied now. So he is absolutely the right person to take hold of that. And thinking of putting that in the First Minister's portfolio is that in order for us to be successful in creating jobs, it's not just the economy department that needs to do things. Housing needs to do things. Transport needs to do things. Planning needs to do things. It needs to go right across what government does. And Adam's thinking is that needs to be led by the First Minister.
Looking at the manifesto again, the Plaid plans are to double the numbers, almost on up to 90 MS at the Senedd. Will more talking heads make a difference to the single mother on benefits in Llanelli with a few children desperately trying to get out of the poverty trap? It's a lot of money for almost doubling the numbers of MS, isn't it?
Well, it is. But we are currently running a national parliament and a national government on fewer elected members than most local authorities have. And it's one of the things that's really struck me since I came back into public life nearly 3 years ago now, is the huge increase in the workload. I mean, when the Assembly was first set up and before it became the Senedd, we weren't passing primary laws. We weren't making laws. We weren't passing budgets where we could control any of the taxation. And what I would say about that single mother is that if we don't scrutinise laws properly, bad law will get made, mistakes will get made, things will go wrong. And already, nobody wants to listen to a politician whinging about workload, and I'm certainly not doing that. But already most members of the Senedd sit on backbench members on 2 or 3 committees. The amount of homework you have to do to do that job effectively. You're reading papers this thick for each committee.
So how would it work in theory and practice then? Would you have two for Llanelli, 2 for? Would it be double the numbers of?
What we would like to see, and what's also, so we've got this current system, haven't we, where we've got the region and then we've got our local members of the Senedd. And, that works in terms of making it fairer so that more people's votes count, that it's more proportional. But it spreads you over such a big area that it's really, and I've certainly found that, it's one of the reasons why I want to be Llanelli's member of the Senedd again, is because you can really get hold of your community then. So what we would prefer, and obviously be for discussion, is that we went to a single transferable vote system, bigger constituencies, but more members per constituency. And then you could choose them in order of your preference, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you were, if you were a Green voter in Llanelli, you might put your Green vote for number one for Green, but then you might think, well, if my Green person isn't successful, who's the next most Green candidate? And that would do, if we had that single transferable vote system, and this is very boring, so forgive me, people who are listening, but it is important. It would maintain that element of fairness. It would reduce the powers of political parties, because at the moment, the political parties decide who goes on the different places on the regional lists, and really, the local people don't have much say over which individual they're voting for. So it would strengthen that vote. And it would strengthen your as a local representative, it would strengthen your commitment to the community. So at the moment, if you did that, you could deliver 80 members of the Senedd by doing that.
And how would you see that as changing dramatically the shift in power, the balance in power, or do you think it would probably work out much the same as it is now, three-way split almost?
We don't know. If you look at opinion polls, it tells you that it wouldn't make a massive difference. But of course, we know opinion polls are taken across the whole of Wales. We don't tend to have constituency by constituency polls. So you can't really tell whether that would be accurate or not. The last time we looked at this scientifically from Plaid's point of view, which was some years ago now, it would have made absolutely no difference to the number of members of the Senedd that we had. It wouldn't have gone up and it wouldn't have gone down, which I thought at the time strengthened our reason for arguing for it, because what we were arguing for was better democracy, not more Plaid members. But it does come down to that, if we believe in democracy, and I know you do, you're passionate about that and about the role of the press in scrutinising, but you've got to have enough non-government, not minister members of your parliament to be able to hold those ministers properly to account, because otherwise, first of all, mistakes might get made by accident, and secondly, ministers can get away with things because there aren't enough people to keep an eye on them.
Wouldn't it be better then to look at almost like a USA system, federal states, where we have that representation? I mean, in North Wales, they're screaming out for some representation for some kind of parliament. For Mid Wales, there's hardly anything. We get emails, we get comments all the time from people saying, hello, we're here. Why are you not saying anything about North Wales? Why are we being ignored? We might as well be in China.
Well, I think that
regional parliaments, possibly.
Well, to the extent that is the case, it's a failure of our current representatives if people feel like that. And I think, for example, the First Minister has put a minister for the North in his cabinet, and I think that's the right thing to do. But I would like to see things as we used to have. For example, we used to have regional committees in the Senedd. So the Senedd members for the North is more problematic with Mid and West because that's too big a region for it to work well. But, we would meet in the North. People could come and give evidence to us directly. We could, same with the South. So you could look at that, but it's a question of where as well of, what's the role of local government here? You don't want in a country of 3.5 million people, I don't think we need a national parliament, some people going to the UK parliament, and regional parliaments and local councils. That's to me is a recipe for confusion. So I think we could address some of that by restoring the regional committee system potentially in the Senedd. I also think we should be taking Senedd subject committees out into the regions a lot more. And we did just before the pandemic hit. We were making plans to take the whole of the Senedd to Wrexham for a week. So all the meetings would take place up there. We would be taking evidence for those groups. We'd be doing visits up there, meetings of the committees, full meetings of the Senedd. Now, there was some criticism that was expensive, but I thought it was the right thing to do because it is bringing the democracy closer to people. So I'm not sure regional parliaments are the answer. Perhaps in a properly independent Wales, we could look at that. But in the meantime, it's about getting our Senedd out of Cardiff and into the communities that we need to represent.
Okay. Looking at your manifesto again, you mentioned the poor provision of local Welsh media. You say a future Welsh government will have a limited ability to create a strong Welsh media. You know that the way things are, the giants have almost gotten away with murder in Wales for so long. They're going further and further away from the towns. Complete misunderstanding, cross-party on what a strong media in Wales should look like. Local outlets, in effect, should be aided to grow, compelling the giants to pay them for their content rather than stealing it and using Getty images or publicly funded local democracy reporters, as good as they are, but who actually are merely duplicating press releases from the county council. There's a big issue here with Welsh media, isn't there?
There's a huge issue, and while I was chairing the Culture and Communications and Welsh Language Committee in the Senedd, while my colleague Bethan Said was on maternity leave, we took a look at this. We took a look at it overall, and we took a look at it in the context of COVID as well, because effective local reporting and proper Welsh reporting, even more important at a time of national crisis. There are real structural weaknesses, and we've seen some development of a really good local newspaper in Caerphilly, but they took that model then to Talbot, and that just didn't work because the local economy couldn't generate enough income. And one thing that I am pleased about is that, when I started that piece of work as a chair of the committee, the Welsh Government was saying, no, we're not going to put any direct subsidy any more than that very limited local democracy stuff because we don't want to interfere. We made the case that they do that anyway with Golwg 360. They don't give them very much, but they give them some. And by the end of this Senedd term, the current Welsh Government has conceded that they will need a fund to support local reporting and local media. Now, of course, it'll be up to the next the next Senedd government to make that happen. And that's really important for us in Plaid, that we support our local media and our Welsh national media, because you can't have a thriving democracy without it. And if we haven't got people reporting on local issues, asking the difficult questions, holding people to account, our democracy isn't working for people. So we would look to pick that idea up and run with it. I think there's more work to be done, though, on consulting with the people currently working in the sector about how they see the best way to plug the gaps. And I guess there'd be a role for a future communications committee to pick up on that. But it's absolutely crucial, and you can do it in such a way that you do it arm's length. That you can ensure that there is no political bias. We do that, for example, in the arts world. The Welsh Government funds the Arts Council, and the Arts Council funds the arts organisations. So there can't be any political bias in what kind of, what shows they're putting on, what art they're exhibiting. And I don't accept that it's more difficult to do that with the media. So that will be a big issue it'll be the big issue for the next government.
Yeah, it would be just
a government. We'll make sure that happens.
It would just be adding an extra kind of paragraphs to the editor's code, and that conforms to the National Assembly's own requirements. Anyway, looking at your manifesto again, it looks at how you can engage communities, especially the young, in taking an interest in politics, talking about school education for young people. We touched on it earlier on. Would you say that politics is exciting enough for young people who might be persuaded to sit through some of the Senedd sessions? Isn't it the case, as one senior politician put it, that the members of the Senedd are just not interesting enough, not passionate enough, monotone robots reading from sheets of A4 paper, shut down by the chair if they get too controversial, like Mr. McAvoy, out you go. We can't have shouting, we can't have raised voices, we can't have real passionate debate that we see at Westminster and other governments around the world.
Well, actually, it's really interesting you should ask me this question, because when I talk to young people, they find that posh men in suits shouting at each other that you get at Westminster a real turn-off. They hate it. They think it's rude. They think it's discourteous, and it is. And I remember being asked in the early days of the Senedd, the Assembly as it was then, we were accused of being boring and not arguing with each other enough. And I remember saying to the prominent journalist who said that to me, well, I'm really sorry, I won't say his name here, but this is about running the country, not entertaining you. If you want to be entertained, go to the pictures. We're not going to disagree for the sake of disagreeing. And where our Senedd does work well, particularly in the committees, is where we look at the evidence and we build a real case to make change. But going back to your point about young people, my experience is that young people really care about issues. Passionate about climate change, for example. An awful lot of young people really, really care about that. Passionate about mental health provision. Passionate about the future of Wales. If we look at the membership of Yes Cymru, tens of thousands of members and many of them young. They don't always understand, they don't always see, though, and that's a failure of us as politicians, that the way you change things in a democracy is through voting, is through getting involved in politics, that kind of, and some of that isn't very exciting, you know. I mean, I probably people will think I'm sad. I really enjoy canvassing, the door knocking. That's the bit of politics that I really, because every time I do that, I learn something. Every time I'm out there, I find out an issue that I didn't know about, or I learn about what people are feeling about something. But, you know, committee meetings, are they always very exciting? Well, no. But in the real world, it's those things that get things done. And so what I've been saying, for example, to young people who are passionate about Wales and engaged in the Yes Cymru movement is that that energy and that commitment is fabulous, and that's a brilliant campaign. But if we want independence, we've got to vote for it. You know, if we want a more ambitious target, you know, in Plaid Cymru, we don't think we can wait till 2050 for Wales to be carbon neutral. We think we have to aim to get us there by 2035. If you want the climate transformed, you know, if you want to protect the climate, you've got to vote for people who are going to do it. If you want a network of walk-in mental health and wellbeing centres for young people across the whole of Wales, you've got to vote for the political party that's going to deliver it. And I guess that's our job. And, you know, one of the things I've been doing in the engagements with schools, and of course, you know, it's not the same as being able to see people face to face. It's not the same as being able to sit down with a group of school students for a couple of hours and talk and listen and talk to them. But what I've been saying to people is, please use that vote, you know, particularly for those new young voters, 16 to 17. I've honestly said to them, I would rather you registered your vote and voted against me than that you didn't use your vote at all, because the decisions that the people who are elected to our next Senedd, and obviously I'm hoping to be one of them, make, will be affecting those young people's lives long after we're all gone. And that's so important. So I think, yeah, you know, young people do care about politics. They can see the political processes as a bit dull. And I suppose it's about plugging some of their enthusiasm and their passion into what we do. And there are certainly lessons we can learn about that. But I don't accept the premise that young people enjoy watching the posh men in suits at Westminster shouting at each other more than they enjoy me having a sensible conversation with Lee Waters about public transport.
The swing you require to win is very slight. It's always been very marginal. Plaid have been humiliated at local elections in Llanelli for elections to Parliament. Even the Conservatives did better. Do you think that the Plaid administration on the County Council's policies and the nagging belief of a lot of Llanelli people that we are the poor relations of the farming rich community of Carmarthen, the Plaid Cymru stronghold, is something that will keep you from winning in May?
Well, I just don't accept the premise of your question. I mean, if you look at the amount of money that has been invested in Llanelli since Plaid Cymru took control of the council, we've actually invested an awful lot more than the previous Labour and Independent administration did, even though you could argue it's not in our direct electoral interest to do that. You know, Plaid running anywhere and Plaid running our county council is not about pork barrel politics. It's not about pouring money into individual wards, as we did see under the previous Labour administration. It's about doing the best for the people who need it most. So we've invested hugely. Is there a question about Llanelli often feeling its voice is left behind? I think there is. And one of my commitments, if I'm elected as Llanelli Senedd member, is to make sure that our voice is heard at all levels and that we're not silenced. I think if you look at those elections that you talk about, you know, there were some issues in individual wards in the county council elections. But remember, you know, we control Kidwelly. We have councillor in Kidwelly. We have a councillor in Pontardaran. You know, we have a councillor in county councillor in Llanelli. So the Llanelli constituency Plaid hasn't been wiped out at a local level by any manner of means. We've done badly in Westminster elections, and I think that's because of the context of those elections. It's got really polarised. And in the context of those elections, you know, the Labour message of you have to vote Labour to keep the Tories out resonates with people. And you can understand that. It's a simple message. Of course, the fact that, you know, in a Senedd election, the Conservatives have never been anywhere close in Llanelli, you know, that's a risk for us. Of course it is. I think, and it's hard to read, you know, in virtual campaigning, you don't get that sense of what's going on the ground. It's hard to read. But I think people are looking for change. You know, we've had 21 years, a lifetime of a Labour government in Cardiff. And a third of our children are in poverty, and hundreds of those children are living in Llanelli. And that Labour Welsh government has scrapped its child poverty targets. They have the least generous offer of free school meals of any government on these islands. And that's not me saying that's the charities, that's organisations like the Bevan Foundation saying that. So, people will have a choice in this election. They'll have a choice between more of the same, and we know what that's delivered, or a fresh start. But what I can offer, of course, is a fresh start, but with experience. I've represented these communities before. When I was Llanelli's first past the post local member, we helped over 5,000 families with their individual issues and problems. We bought the breast care centre to Prince Philip Hospital, for example, and that was directly the result of local people campaigning and me raising their voice at the Senedd. So I can offer experience as well as a chance to start afresh, and that's what we need if we're going to rebuild our communities after COVID.
The question of independence may become the Welsh Brexit, dividing a nation. Do you think Plaid are hedging their bets? Are you waiting until such time as you get elected? Or is this now, are we going to see a sort of all-out assault towards independence? Are you hedging your bets given the fact that the poll suggests that the majority of people in Wales, there is a majority, want to remain in the union? Where do you stand on that?
Well, we're not hedging our bets at all. You've looked at the headlines from our manifesto. We're clear that if Plaid Cymru get an overall majority, we will offer the people of Wales a referendum on independence. And you're right that we don't yet have the majority of people with us. But I would just say this, and this comes back to why I joined Plaid in the first place. Since working men, and I use the word men advisedly, first had the vote in Wales in the 1870s, we have never elected a majority of Conservative members of the British Parliament. And yet for about 3/4 of that time, we've had Conservative governments that we didn't vote for. That made the case to me for joining Plaid as a history student born in Colchester in Essex. That was what convinced me. And we should have a government that we choose. We should be making decisions. But independence is normal. No country that has ever become independent of another country anywhere in the world has ever applied to rejoin the country it left. That's never, ever happened. And we have to think about what's happening on these islands. There's every possibility of an SNP overall majority in Scotland and a referendum and Scotland leaving. The two parts of Ireland, partly because of the way the Brexit deal has been worked out, are moving closer and closer together all the time. We could find ourselves with a united Ireland, and that's up to the people of Ireland. It's not our choice. So then the people of Wales have got to think of, do we want to stay attached to a much bigger neighbour whose political culture is very different from ours, whose economy is very different from ours? Or do we want a new deal for the countries on these islands? Do we want decisions that matter to Wales to be made in Wales? I think that growth in support of independence that we've seen in the last 3 years is unstoppable. I think when you look at how many young people passionately believe we can take care of ourselves and each other, that's the road that we're on. So absolutely no fudging from us. I mean, a Plaid Cymru government will be doing an awful lot more than delivering the independence referendum. We'll have the job guarantee for young people. We'll have the mental health hubs. We'll bring forward the date for decarbonisation. We'll create 60,000 good quality jobs in the green economy and in care. But all of that in the context of this being what we can do with the power we've got, we could do so much more if as a nation we were free to take care of ourselves and each other.
Yeah, Helen Mary Jones, pleasure speaking to you as usual. Diolch yn fawr i gyd. Pob lwc yn y etholiadau, and we'll catch up with you soon. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.